Climate change, an agricultural perspective. According to National Public Radio, the average American consumes around 270.7 pounds of meat per year, based on data found in 2012. The average person living in Luxembourg consumes 301.4 pounds of meat per year. Although meat consumption is on the descent, the numbers we are seeing are still significant. So why is this a problem, you may ask? The meat industry is one of the most polluting industries in the country. A recent study done by Mighty Earth tells us that companies like Tyson Foods and Cargill, companies that produce large quantities of meat, are also producing more greenhouse gases than companies like ExxonMobil, Shell, or BP. When the average person thinks of ways that they can reduce their environmental footprint, they often think of spending less time in a car or carpooling to get places in order to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. However, looking at these statistics, eating less meat is actually an easier way to make a positive impact. Let's look at some more facts. The agriculture and factory farming industry as a whole has an extremely negative impact on our environment. To produce 1/4 pound of beef, it requires significant amounts of animal feed, water, land, and fossil fuels. 6.7 pounds of grain and feed are used to feed cattle in the industry. The money that goes towards this grain could be put towards other types of grains or foods to feed people living in poverty without access to these foods. 52.8 gallons of water are used to irrigate crops on farms. Looking at all the other impacts on water in our environment, especially on water quality in areas affected by drought, it is scary to see so much water being wasted towards such a small amount of beef. 74.5 square feet of land are used for animals and crop production. 30% of all land on Earth has been taken up by agricultural use. The agricultural industry is tearing out portions of the rainforest, eliminating many habitats for a variety of species, and causing a decrease in biodiversity. Finally, looking at fossil fuels, 1,036 BTUs of energy are used for transportation and production. A microwave could be powered for 18 minutes with that amount of energy. All of these statistics can be credited to NPR. The production of beef for sale is not the only contributor to some of our environmental problems. Cows themselves contribute. Since the demand for meat and dairy is so high, we have millions of cows living on these factory farms. Once a female cow is born, she will live the rest of her life being artificially inseminated to reproduce another cow, which causes her to produce milk. Not only is this process incredibly inhumane towards the animal, it perpetuates the cycle of dairy consumption. Many female calves are raised for dairy, and many male calves are raised to one day be slaughtered for beef. As factory farms continue to breed more cattle, the number of methane emissions continues to increase. Cows are ruminant animals, which means they have four-chambered stomachs. Methane gas is emitted during the process of microbial fermentation, a process that happens during digestion in the rumen, one of the parts of the stomach. A study done by Penn State tells us that approximately 132 to 264 gallons of ruminal gas produced by fermentation are belched each day. Cows are belching to prevent bloating, but in turn releasing significant amounts of methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. When considering the number of cows we have living on Earth, this is a very large amount of greenhouse gases flowing into our atmosphere. Another issue that should be looked at in regards to climate change is deforestation due to agriculture. According to the World Wildlife Fund, agriculture is the largest single cause of deforestation and severe forest degradation. Many forests around the world are being converted into areas that can be used to hold livestock and crops. As a result of this deforestation, we are looking at severe habitat destruction, which puts several species at risk of extinction. World Wildlife Fund also tells us that scientists say we are looking at less than 60,000 orangutans living in Sumatra and Borneo. This conversion of forests into cropland is for more than just meat and dairy farming. Soy, cocoa, coffee, and palm oil are in high demand, and rainforest areas are the perfect climate for growing many of these crops, thus explaining the deforestation in these southern rainforest areas. According to Science Daily, 2/3 of all cut forests are cut due to commercial agricultural needs. In addition to the physical climate change issues, we see economic issues with agriculture as well. Many of the big meat production industries like Tyson and Cargill make a serious profit off of their products without considering the environmental impacts. In order to make a difference in our environment, these companies are the ones that need to change. When we think of climate change contributors, the first target is often oil companies like ExxonMobil and Shell. Although they do contribute, the environmental damage coming from the meat and dairy industry is gravely overlooked. Americans are accustomed to consuming large amounts of meat and dairy. They are willing to give their money to these companies without considering the environmental impacts. Yes, we are often told to consider where our food comes from, but I don't think that the average person really thinks about how the food they eat can impact our environment on a large scale. When looking at businesses that deal with the sale of meat and dairy, it is important to look past just the big name brands like Tyson or Cargill. It is necessary to look into fast food chains and even grocery stores to find out what companies they are buying from and whether or not those companies are leaving significant footprints in our environment. Mighty Earth, an environmental organization located in Washington, D.C., did a study this year to examine several businesses and their sourcing of meat. The study looked into at least 23 businesses to determine whether or not they were sourcing animal products sustainably. Each company received a grade, A through F, in the following categories: sustainable feed sourcing, supply chain greenhouse gas emission reduction, centralized manure processing, and an overall grade. Surprisingly, even businesses like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's received all Fs in these categories. Although Whole Foods seems to have such a commitment to selling and promoting organic foods and healthy eating, they are clearly not doing their part on the environmental end of things. The underlying problem that this unsustainable sourcing comes from is a lack of regulation against the agricultural industry. The EPA's website only lists 3 methods for reducing greenhouse gas emissions among agricultural practices. These methods are listed as reduction opportunities rather than formal legislation to prevent greenhouse gas emissions. These are suggestions for managing land and crops, livestock, and manure. A study published by the USDA in 2010 discusses other methods for greenhouse gas emission reduction among the agriculture industry. However, these are mostly suggestions and recommendations rather than formal legislation or policy. Some of these suggestions include using sources of renewable energy like wind turbines or solar power and increasing carbon sequestration. Although these practices would make a significant difference, they are costly and not typically practiced within the agriculture industry. The article dives into the proposed economic incentives for companies that participate in conservation of resources and lower the number of greenhouse gas emissions. A cap-and-trade system could be used as well to encourage no-till practices or to eliminate nitrogen fertilizer inhibitors. Nitrogen is something that is necessary for plant growth in our ecosystem. Too high of nitrate composition in plants is not good for the plant or for the humans consuming the plant. Additionally, excess nitrogen can run off into soil. Excess nitrogen is linked to problems like eutrophication and even acid rain. These statistics come from a study done by the U.S. National Library of Medicine and the National Institute of Health. One piece of legislation that we can see that makes a small difference in the agricultural world is the Conservation Reserve Program. This is a program that offers money to farmers who are willing to stop production on land at risk of erosion or other environmental damage after years and years of production. This land is then converted back to grass or trees, which promotes wildlife growth and carbon sequestration. Although the government has not created many pieces of legislation surrounding the issue of greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural industry, there are still many things that can be done by every citizen to make a positive impact. By limiting consumption of meat, the demand is lowered. If all citizens of the U.S. were to change their eating habits, we would be able to make a change in the greenhouse gas emissions as a result of less livestock and less land use. We would be saving water and eliminating pollution occurring on our Earth, such as water and air pollution. Destruction of the rainforest could be limited with a lessened need for production of animal products. We can additionally look to tools for change such as education, outreach, and policy to make a difference in our world. By educating Americans on the impact our food patterns are making on our environment, we can attempt to make a difference in our world. Furthermore, by lobbying and pushing legislation and policy, our government could intervene to set actual caps on legal greenhouse gas emissions. With a combination of these crucial elements, we would likely see a change in the destruction of our climate.